Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and with me, as always, some of the best MMA minds in the world. This week, we got Goes from MMA Junkie Radio. According to him, he always keeps it real. Mike Bond from Toronto. He just crushed it for us in Phoenix, Arizona for UFC 274. And Nolan King from Boston, fresh off his KO versus COVID. He's now 1-0. Someone update his tapology. Cold coffee on the ones and twos. Let's get to it. All right, guys. So UFC 274 had a great fight in the main event on Saturday night. But as you all know, there wasn't a title defense for Charles Oliveira because of a missed weight of half of a pound the day before. His first weigh-in registered 155.5, and after being given an hour to cut, he came in at the same 155.5. Huge mishap, except several fighters complained that the scale may be tampered with, was being tampered with. UFC president called the situation a nightmare and said the UFC will put a security guard around their backstage scale going forward. The end result was Oliveira had to vacate the title and didn't win it back after he submitted Justin Gaethje. So, who is at fault here? Goes, you're leading off. You got 4 minutes. Go.
Man, I think when it's all said and done, guys, the fault has to fall on Charles Oliveira. I understand that there were issues, okay? A lot of fighters complained about that, but a lot of fighters also made weight. There was only one other fighter that didn't make weight, and it was by a lot. It wasn't by 0.5. So I think you put a lot of the blame on Charles Oliveira. You put a lot of blame on his camp as well, because when you think about it, as soon as you start hearing about rumblings of the scale problem, a lot of people heard about this the night before. You've been in these fighter hotels before, guys. You know how fast news travels. They should have addressed it right then and there. Okay, so fast forward to the morning when he had an hour to cut a 0.5 pounds. I don't know. I've seen fighters before get to that situation where they just can't. There's nowhere left for anything to come off of. Charles Oliveira didn't look like that. He didn't look like one of those fighters that was sucked out, that didn't have anything more to give. So I want to know what happened in that hour. What the heck happened? What did he do? Was he sitting there trying to politic the issue, or was he actually trying to lose it? I think more information is going to come out soon, but it's something that does have to be resolved. I mean, there were some things that people complained about, but when you think about how long we've been doing this, we haven't had this problem very many times at all, and especially at this level. So I think at the end of the day, it all falls on Charles Oliveira.
Hard to disagree with that, but tons of questions for sure. Why was he the last guy to weigh in, man? I'm really, really confused by everything going on. Mike, give us some more intel.
Yeah, I think what you said there is an important. We saw Rose Namajunas, who of course came into this event as champion. She was the first person on the scale, or second, can't remember. That's what you do. We see that a lot of these times as the champions come in very early on. And was it arrogance, confidence in his weight, all that kind of stuff that he came out so late in the game? He still got an extra hour and didn't make it. So that's a pretty bad look. When you're a champion and a team around a champion, you need to really make sure that these things are buttoned up. And if you have to take extra measures like cutting down to 154 to make sure there's absolutely no room for error, then do that. I know that's easier said than done sitting here as the people not cutting weight, but you just can't let stuff like this happen, even if there's minor mistakes with the scale, and especially if we're hearing rumblings about it. So I think that right there, not a great look for Charles Oliveira, but I do think he had some bad luck in this scenario too. The commission in Arizona, I think the person handling and manning the scale that morning was definitely being a little bit of a stickler in that scenario. I think this has probably happened many a time where we've seen championship fights come on, depends on the commission, the location. People will just go to 155 and slide it over. They're not sticking there looking for the exact 0.5 or 0.3 on a scale. So I think that was something that really went against Charles Oliveira in this situation too. That was pretty unfortunate.
Man, I heard that. Not just a stickler. That guy had to have been a hall monitor in high school. All right, Nolan King, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously everybody bears a little bit of blame, I think, in this scenario. I mean, the fact that Dana's even come out and called it a nightmare shows that. It shows that I think he felt a little bit of a screw up on the UFC's part for their test scale. And I think there is a lot of blame that should go that way. I mean, these fighters show up every fight week. They do the same things. They have their routines. They know what works for them. Charles Oliveira hasn't missed weight in years and years. So, sure, he was kind of a habitual weight misser at one point in his career, but that's gone because he's figured it out. So for them to have, I think there was 20 fighters on the card that either weighed 0.5 over the exact mark or a pound over or missed. So we don't usually see that. Sometimes we see guys come in light, but I think that you got to build in, if you're Charles Oliveira, you got to build into your weight cut that margin of error just in case something goes wrong. We see it with champs all the time. They weigh in at, you know, 0.5 under 155 or 145 or 135. So everybody's to blame, but I think mostly the UFC and Charles have to split it down the middle 50-50.
Yeah, and credit to Dana White. He did say that Charles will get paid his pay-per-view points. So I thought that was tremendous, probably a huge relief. But I'd love to see a 30 for 30 behind the scenes. What happened? How does the guy step on the scale, you know, needing to lose half a pound and then come back an hour later in the same situation? Come on, something's weird there. All right, we got to move on here. Topic number 2. Like I said, the main event was great regardless of the weigh-in drama. Chucky Olives impressed the whole world on Saturday night. Now he's guaranteed to be one of the 2 participants for the vacant UFC lightweight title to be contested later this year. Who should his opponent be when this event takes place? There's lots of names out there. You guys have heard some of them being floated around. You got 4 minutes on the clock. Mike, it's on you, dog.
Yeah, lightweight is so good right now, man. I mean, what a division this is. Obviously, Charles Oliveira is separating himself from the pack. I still view him, you know, I guess, as the champion or the best guy in this division. Like you said, I'm glad the UFC is paying him his pay-per-view points for this fight. Dana White wouldn't commit to the next fight, but I hope they do him right and are, you know, willing to do that and split that money, you know, rightfully to him. As far as the opponent, I think the one, to me, it's got to be Islam Makhachev. Obviously, Oliveira is kind of going around beating all these guys already. We're going to be looking at rematches if it's not basically him or Beneil Dariush or maybe Conor McGregor if he wants to cut back down and they want to give him that opportunity. But ultimately, I think Makhachev with the 10-fight winning streak, the way he's looked in these fights, and then, of course, the style, I think he's got a pretty intriguing potential matchup with Charles Oliveira. I don't think he would fear him on the ground. I think his pressure is a good counter, his submission offense, his submission defense. I think that's probably in terms of, you know, just straight up what's the most compelling matchup right now. I think it's Makhachev for me. So the timing makes sense too. UFC's going to Abu Dhabi October 22nd for UFC 281. I think that makes a lot of sense to do that fight there. Feel kind of bad for Charles Oliveira that you'd make him going from fighting in Arizona, which is Justin Gaethje's backyard, to Abu Dhabi, which is essentially Islam Makhachev's backyard to a degree. So that kind of sucks for him, but ultimately, you know, the UFC train keeps going. They have these events booked and they have to slot the fights in. So I think that would be the one if I had the control of the matchmaking book.
Yeah, and he also got an endorsement from one of the matchmakers, Joe Rogan, in the back of the arena there in Phoenix. So, you know, might go a long way. All right, Nolan, you're up next.
Yeah, I mean, Islam Makhachev is the right answer. I think it really checks all the boxes. He's really proven. I know, sure, Bobby Green necessarily isn't the average level of opponent that will earn you a title shot, but I think from what he showed from himself, just the dominance, the way he beat somebody like Bobby Green, the way that he's picked up these other wins, the way that he's run through guys like Dan Hooker, like that is the best next challenge for Charles Oliveira. I mean, all these other guys, you know, the Chandler fight was close. I think there's some intrigue if you were to make that rematch, but let's get a new challenge to the champion or the should-be champion first. Stylistically, Islam's wrestling versus Charles Jiu-Jitsu. I think there's a lot of intrigue there. Like Mike said, they want Makhachev to fight in Abu Dhabi. That checks another box. So for me, if Charles really wants to solidify his place as not only just like a champion or the best in his division, but as really one of those guys that when we start having the conversation about pound for pound best and the guys that have that mystique as champion where you're like, man, I don't know who can beat him. I don't see anybody else beating him. If he wants to really, really solidify himself in that position, he needs to take out one more really elite new challenge that provides new issues for him that we haven't necessarily seen him deal with, and that's Islam Makhachev.
Hey, I'm all for it. But like you said, coming off Bobby Green and before that, Dan Hooker, remember these fights were late notice, no top 5 opponent for him. So, I just throwing it out there, but goes finish up. What are your thoughts?
I think a lot of phone calls need to be made. First of all, you got to call Oliveira and just see how he feels, because even though he won that fight, he did take some damage in that fight. You got to call Beneil Dariush and find out what the extent is of this injury, how he's recovering, because to put him in a spot like that, you don't have to just be recovered. You have to be in championship form, and I'm sure he doesn't want to go into a fight like that any less than that. Makhachev is probably the leading name. I think it makes the most sense. But one thing that I think makes it interesting is the Khabib factor, right? He'll be there. That'll kind of turn into a little bit of a mix. And how about seeing Charles Oliveira next to the guy that seemed to be untouchable? Now they're talking about Oliveira as being untouchable. It'd be nice to have that little storyline there. But I would not be shocked, guys, Michael Chandler blew people away. I would not be shocked if somehow they spin it for him to get that fight. And it's not even the biggest spin because he almost won that first fight. It was very, very close. So I wouldn't be shocked if they gave it to him as well.
Good stuff, fellas. All right, let's march to topic number 3. Another great fight on that main card involving the name that was just tossed out by Goes. Michael Chandler versus Tony Ferguson. Ferguson looked great early on, scoring a knockdown on Iron Michael, but Chandler came back to win, with the takedown and some ground and pound to close out round 1. But so far, so good, right? Just a few seconds into round 2, absolute devastation as Chandler viciously KO'd Ferguson with the front kick to the chin. And as another famous Michael likes to say it was good night, Irene. UFC President Dana White, he even went so far as to say it was the most vicious knockout he's ever seen. Now, during the post-fight interview with Joe Rogan, Chandler then unleashed a great call-out for either rematching the winner of the night's main event that had yet to happen, or you guessed it, Conor McGregor. And McGregor has since replied via social media. He's down, by the way. So Chandler's got some options. I ask you, is this the fight to make, though? McGregor versus Chandler. Nolan, get the party started. 4 minutes.
Yeah, I think it is, honestly. I think the timing lines up well. It seems like Nate Diaz, we don't really know what's going on with him, and maybe that McGregor fight isn't necessarily what he's looking for. But for Conor, he needs that B-side. He needs somebody that's just not going to be a warm body to stand in there and, not somebody that doesn't have a name. And Michael Chandler, his stock may have never been higher than it is right now. Sure, he had the intrigue when he came over to the UFC and people wanted to see how big he was and how good he was and how big of a name he could be. And he went out there and beat Dan Hooker. Sure, he exploded. But now he's really solidified himself as I think we can really gauge where he is in this division. And it is at the top. I mean, he says it all the time. I'll see you at the top. He is at the top right now. He has shown that he can stand in there and slug with Justin Gaethje and hang in for 3 rounds. He has shown that he can put Charles Oliveira on the ropes and really hurt him. And so he's a guy that can talk well. He can go back and forth with Conor McGregor. You can put him up there at a press conference and it'll be interesting. He's somebody that I think there are avenues for McGregor to win. It's not like when this matchup's set up, you could say, oh, there's no way he can lose. Chandler might be favored. There's probably a lot of avenues for him to win as well, but that's exactly the type of fight that you want Conor McGregor to be in. And I think Michael Chandler's earned it. He's put in his minutes and time in the sport. His stock is high. His fan base is high. He's putting on highlights. That's the one to make. And he's cutting great promos too.
He is cutting great promos. And Goes, I know you're up next. You're warm to this already. You discussed it before. But let's not forget Connie Mack. He's got options too.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's you have to ask yourself, who is it best for? For Michael Chandler, Conor McGregor is the best option. I think it makes the most sense. But for the UFC, it's always going to be Nate Diaz. You have to finish that trilogy. You have to get it done. If you skip over that, there's a chance that you can never go back to it. And with Michael Chandler, you can always do Conor and Michael Chandler. Look, I love the fight. Conor and Michael Chandler, I think, makes the most sense for Michael Chandler. In a way, when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense for Conor McGregor because if you're looking at it stylistically, this is a guy who sometimes can be stubborn and wants to trade in the pocket. And he has had some losses early in the fight, which is where Conor McGregor is usually the strongest. So I understand why he would want to take this fight. Another little nugget that I felt like Michael Chandler gave Conor was saying, let's do it at 170. I think that completely changes this fight, guys. Like Michael Chandler is one of the smaller 155ers. For him to go up to 170 and it being his first time up there fighting at that level, I don't know if that's the smartest thing to do. 155, I'd have Michael Chandler winning that fight all day, especially with the way he looked this past weekend. But at 170, I think it's a different beast. So I feel like the fight to always make is the Nate Diaz one. But if you can't do that, man, this is a hell of an option.
Well, if they do it at 170, McGregor will only have to cut 60 because he's a jack 230 right now. All right, Mike Bond, what are your thoughts? I know on social media, others have been kind of shoving Michael Chandler as well.
Yeah, Conor's a refrigerator, as he said himself right now at 170. Man, this is a tough one. I think what Go said was pretty on point. If you're Michael Chandler and you're his supporter and you're in his camp, hell yeah, this is like the best option you could get. Chandler has fought at 170 before. He had a couple one-offs in Bellator, but obviously not against any real significant level of competition. And I think that definitely makes it more intriguing of a fight there for Conor McGregor and more winnable there. But I don't really know. I mean, if you're Conor, I agree that the Nate Diaz fight is probably the more winnable matchup for him right now. And if you're the UFC, I assume your goal is to have Conor McGregor win his next fight. I mean, that's what you want regardless. So Nate Diaz, maybe Tony Ferguson for Conor, maybe Justin Gaethje. He'll stand with him. I think there's a lot of options out there for both of these guys, as we've kind of talked about here. So as I said, kind of off the top, man, these divisions are so good right now. Throw any fight together, and I don't think it's going to be a miss.
Couldn't agree more. That lightweight division is popping. I know on a previous spinning back, like we talked about the marquee division possibly being heavyweight. I don't know, man. Lightweight may have regained its spot right now. All right, we got to move on. Topic number 4. In the co-main event, Kayla Esparza defeated Rose Namajunas to become the new strawweight champion. This is her second win over Namajunas, and she's now a 2-time champion 7 years later. All that sounds pretty cool so far, right? New champ, changing of the guard, old veteran of the division reclaims the title, except the fight was terrible. Many calling it the worst title fight ever. One of the worst MMA fights ever. Dana White said he was zoning out during the fight. Did you agree with the decision? We'll start there. What did your scorecard say? Also, who is more to blame for this terrible fight? Starting things off goes. It's back at you. 4 minutes.
Yeah, I agree with the decision. I had Carla winning 3 of those rounds, but it really was up in the air. You know, George and I, we were doing a watch along. We're staring at each other. We really didn't know what was going on. I don't think the corners knew what was going on. The commentators didn't really know what was going on. It was tough to really judge that fight. In my eyes, it was Carla was trying to win the fight while Rose was trying not to lose the fight. And I think if you have to assign blame, you got to assign it to Rose Namajunas, and I'll tell you why. Before this fight started, if you asked her, what is the perfect scenario? Where do you want this fight to take place? She would say, on the feet. I don't want to go to the ground with Kayla Esparza unless I have to. That's where the majority of this fight was contested. And she didn't really do anything to make you think she's the striker. You know, she was very timid. She wasn't doing very much. She was pumping the jab here and there, but she didn't really do much. So if I had to put the blame, I would put it on her. And I would put a little bit of blame on that corner because they just weren't telling her the way things were in reality. You know, we were all confused. There's no way anybody in the world could say without a shadow of a doubt that Rose Namajunas was winning this fight. And lastly, a little bit of blame has to be on the referee. I think he could have been a little bit more aggressive in his call, maybe some timidity, something. But yeah, at the end of the day, I agree with you guys. This was a terrible fight.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Let me tell you something too. When the fight did hit the ground, Rose popped right back up. So yeah, I mean, she should have reached a certain level of comfort. Mike Bond, you were there in person. What were you thinking as all this was unfolding?
Man, yeah, they said it on the broadcast. I watched it back last night when I got home for Keith Peterson being nicknamed No Nonsense. He sure took a lot of nonsense in this fight. The fact that he didn't address any warnings or anything like that, I think a big mistake by him. He should have forced more action. But yeah, sitting there cage side, I mean, I'll be honest, we were still kind of reeling from the Michael Chandler knockout. So like my focus wasn't 100% on the fight, but as I watched it more and more and watched it back, I did think Carla won the first round, the second round, and I believe the fourth round, with Rose getting 3 and 5. Outside of that, like, it was just, I don't know how anyone could say confidently they thought one side won this fight. There was very, very little going on. It was really, really bad. So like, to sit here, I don't think you can call it a robbery. You can call it a bad decision. Like, it was, those rounds were coin tosses based off the most minimal action ever. Not a great look. I think, both their stocks dropped significantly on this. Rose Namajunas, I think she was on the cusp of being a pretty big star in the sport, and this is definitely a setback for her. So that's pretty unfortunate. I feel bad for her to a degree. The fact she's putting statements out, calling herself like a crap person. I mean, I think she's being a little too hard on herself in that degree. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what we can sit here and say. There's no excuses for how poor of a fight that was. And hopefully we don't have to get put through that ever again.
Yeah, and well, she's now 0-2 against Kayla Esparza, but she owns wins over some of the other contenders. Anything can happen in that wild division. All right, how about you, Nolan King? Wrap things up.
Yeah, I had it 48-47 Esparza, but I mean, like everybody said, you could give it 4 different scorecards on that fight, and I don't think you could really disagree with any of them. But I think we can all agree that it's just not a good look. It's just everybody involved, I think, has taken a hit from this. And for Esparza, she's got some tough matchups ahead of her now as a champion that people probably aren't that excited for her to get in there again and to have to potentially sit through that again. For Rose, for somebody that I think at times has fluctuated in motivation and getting down on herself and stuff like that, this is going to be a tough blow too. You know, it's one thing if she lost her belt and she got a rematch, but nobody's going to want to see that. So she's going to have to climb again. And that's going to be something that I think for her, she's going to have to turn on, and she's going to have to find that motivation again. And who knows how long that's going to take, or you know, if it will ever happen. So I guess we'll see, but just kind of an L in the co-main event all around.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about what Mike said. Crap person. I wouldn't dare say that about her, man. She's been a quality champion. It was just a crappy fight, but she definitely will be back. She's rebounded before, so look out for Thug Rose to make a comeback at some point. All right, we wrap things up here talking PFL. Two-time PFL champion Kayla Harrison got a win this past week, but she wasn't too thrilled with her performance. What did you think of her performance? Was the online criticism warranted? And more importantly, was it fair? 4 minutes are on the clock. Mike, take it away.
I didn't love it. I mean, we're not going to sit here and slice it up like it was some amazing fight. Kayla Harrison did what she had to do. It puts her in an intriguing position, not getting a finish, you know, if you're looking at kind of the PFL standings wise with the only 3 points. But yeah, I mean, coming off all this hype and the big free agency decision and all that, I don't think that's exactly what you want to come out. But I think she put it fairly aptly post-fight and saying it really is difficult sometimes to go in there and finish an opponent or look insanely dominant who's going in there with a clear unwillingness to try to win the fight. It seemed like Marina Mokhtarian, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, was, you know, had no intention of knowing she was going to pull out a victory in that. And because of that, it was very defensive. She did everything she could to just basically not get stopped in that fight. So that's a tricky thing to do when you're trying to fight opponents like that, especially kind of on the women's MMA side where you see less one-punch knockouts and things like that. So I could understand why Kayla Harrison maybe wasn't thrilled with this fight. I understand her reasoning afterwards, but I think it'll be a good learning lesson for her going forward. And the experience for Kayla only helps with these fights. I mean, it's 13-0 now. She hasn't had the most cage time in the world. I think going 15 minutes when she usually finishes people is only going to be beneficial to her in the long run as a fighter. But absolutely, when you're putting together the Kayla Harrison career resume highlight, I think you probably leave this fight out.
Yeah, well, perfectly said. And, you know, maybe she raised the bar on herself because she's just been so great. And that's why it looks that way. All right, Nolan, what were your thoughts on this fight?
Yeah, I mean, as somebody that was very much on the Kayla Harrison bandwagon, and I think she still has it in her. I mean, who are we kidding? She won. She didn't run into any issues, and she's continuing to hold that unbeaten record. But for somebody that was during that free agency, thought about, you know, her performances a lot and thought about her place in the whole sphere of the best woman fighter in the world right now, I was on her bandwagon to the point that I would say, yeah, I think if she stepped in there with Amanda Nunes or if she stepped in there with Cyborg, I think she would win. And after seeing that fight on Friday, I'm not sure that I would be willing to make those statements anymore. I just think to go in there against an opponent that was tough and look good is one thing, or just look dominant, but then to also, you know, not look great. That's not what you want to hear from the fighter that I'm pegging as the best woman in the world. So for me, I'm leaning with Chris Cyborg or Amanda Nunes, or I guess Juliana Pena, if she can go out there and do it again against Amanda and show that wasn't, you know, some sort of random blip upset outlier. I think Kayla's going to come out, and I know she can continue to do, even when she puts on bad performances, she can win. There's $1 million on the line this season. That's the most important thing. But if she really wants to solidify herself and raise her stock so that the next time that it's time for her to move on, she can be considered the hottest ticket, the hottest selling fighter out there. She's got to impress. She can't be doing performances like that.
Yeah, one nice thing about the PFL season is she can, you know, right the ship in 2 months in her next fight, and then the playoffs come, and then all of a sudden we'll probably forget about this fight versus Marina. I'm going with M squared. I'm not going to try the last name. Goes, wrap things up here.
I mean, Kayla got the win, and that's the most important thing. We have to remember right now she's in the frame of mind of PFL and winning another $1 million, and she got closer to doing that. The train will keep moving forward. But when we try and compare her to these other names, like Nolan said, through free agency that she's attached to, she did good enough to impress us as a mixed martial artist. Yes, there's progression. But as somebody that needs to be talked about in that top 3, maybe even top 4, I don't know that performance really warranted that. Remember, she was a minus 5,000 favorite in that fight, okay? 5,000. That's destructive. So the best way to look at it for me is I look at, would Amanda have finished that fight? I think so. Would have Chris done that, I think so as well. So I think the criticism was warranted a little bit, but Kayla is a master of turning things around. We'll see what she does in this next fight.
Dude, that probably had a lot to do with it, man. You're right. They were blowing up those odds. Minus 5,000 is ridiculous. It didn't appear that way. All right, guys, great job as always here on this week's Spinning Back Clique. And of course, this week we got more stuff to watch, more stuff to discuss. UFC, I believe it's on ESPN 36 with Blachowicz and Rakic here in Las Vegas. Keep it locked on MMA Junkie throughout the week. And just know this, we'll be back next week to discuss it all here on